Blake Roberts is the lead staff for the Sacramento San-Joaquin Delta National Heritage Area. He runs numerous heritage-related projects and planning efforts, including those focused on historic communities. He has a PhD in urban and regional planning from UC Irvine. Please welcome Blake Roberts.
Well, thank you so much, Delta. It is great to be here tonight. I have wanted to call this Tales of the Sacramento San-Joaquin Delta, because really one of the things that national heritage areas are all about is storytelling. Telling the story about how an area is important, to the national story. And I really wanted to emphasize that tonight. The Delta is California's first and only national heritage area. We have John Garamendi to thank for the tireless work that he had to make this a reality. Back in 2019, we were created, and I have been with the commission even about 5 years before that happened. This is really a realization of a dream. This has been a long time coming. The initial idea for the National Heritage Area happened in probably the mid-2000s, and so we're really excited about the work that we're doing. Unfortunately, the Delta National Heritage Area is square, which makes it a little hard to put on a screen very easily. So I just wanted to give you at least a little bit more of a close-up. So this is the northern part of the National Heritage Area. It goes up into the Yola Bypass, past Interstate 5, includes West Sacramento. Unfortunately, it does not include any of the city of Sacramento, but we're still going to tell the story of Sacramento anyway. And then down along 160, if you've ever had a chance to drive down 160, and if you haven't, I really encourage you to. And then it goes all the way down into really the heart of the area, into Walnut Grove, Ryde, Ileton, Rio Vista. And those are places that were, initially steamboat stops and have become really historic towns. But it also goes pretty far south into Discovery Bay, Clifton Court 4 Bay, and then as far west as Vallejo and Hercules. So what is a National Heritage Area? This is the language that National Park Service uses. But really what it's all about is how does a landscape come together and people come together to form a nationally important story. And so one of the things I really wanted to emphasize here is that it's a nationally significant landscape. So why is the Delta a nationally significant landscape? And water, not surprisingly, is the first thing. If you don't have water, you don't have the Delta. As we put here, it's the lifeblood of the Delta and for California. And really we want to emphasize how important it is, just on a spiritual level, but also in terms of practical level as well. So this is the Bay Delta watershed. It goes all as far north as Oregon, goes as south to the Tehachapi Mountains, and includes a huge amount of area. All these rivers eventually flowing into a very narrow strait. And if you notice here, the Carquinez Strait is tiny. At one point, it is half a mile wide. So you're talking about all of the water coming through the Central Valley from the Sierras, all of that coming in and basically just trying to be forced through half a mile wide point. And so what ended up happening initially when the Delta was created is that you had all these rivers bringing down all this sediment, and then they come to this narrow point, and then they drop all the sediment. And that's the reason why you have the Delta looking the way it is because basically they reached a stopping point, all the dirt and everything else just dropped and formed an amazing area. One of the things that we kind of don't think about as much is that the Delta was a highway for people coming through during the Gold Rush era all the way up until now. It's a water highway that really is important because you have to think that at one point you have to go from the ocean all the way through the San Francisco Bay and through the Delta in order to get to the Central Valley. And so it really was a very critical transportation corridor. And so the Delta King is obviously something that we have, it's a treasure right now, but it was at one point a working steamboat. It was going up and down from Sacramento to San Francisco. There's still a lot of water transportation going on. The Port of Stockton is one of the largest inland ports in the United States. It's really an economic generator. And so sometimes I don't think we really think about how important water still is to this day. You really can't talk about the Delta without talking about the water that's going to elsewhere in the state. It supports 25 million residents, the state's $4.1 trillion economy, and it provides water for more than 3 million acres of productive farmland. The Central Valley Project, the State Water Project, these are important elements in the creation of California, and it's reliant on the Delta. But also, there's a lot of small towns that are on the water. They really thrive on the water. Walnut Grove is an amazing place. Locke is an amazing place. Ileton. There's all these towns that were really important stops along for many people along the way. And I think we want to think about how we can celebrate these towns. It's also an important part of the natural part of California. You have the Pacific Flyway. 60% of all wintering birds are in the Central Valley. Think about that. That's a huge amount of birds in a very small space. Even though the Central Valley, a lot of its wetlands have disappeared over the years, there's still a lot there that is important. There's also fish. Notice that I did not include the Delta smelt as a picture here. But the green sturgeon, there's striped bass, there's all these different fish that come through the area and are important. Hydraulic mining. I don't think a lot of people realize the importance of hydraulic mining in sort of setting the stage for modern environmental policy. At one point, after all of the gold was able to get out of they could get all the gold out of the waterways, some enterprising person said, let me shoot a jet of water against the hills and just let it all sort out. Figure out where all the gold is that way. What ended up happening is you had an environmental catastrophe because all of the sediment from the foothills started coming down through all the riverways and ended up clogging many waterways. It ended up raising the water table in the Delta. And as a result, many farmers sued those that were doing hydraulic mining. And this is in the 1880s. This is really the start of environmental policy. The farmers won. They were able to get hydraulic mining to stop. And I think a lot of people don't realize how important the Delta was to what we think of as environmental policy and law today. I can't emphasize how important the Delta is for Native Americans. Several years ago, we had a listening session at the Delta Stewardship Council, our sister agency. And one of the things that somebody pointed out is that they looked at this sculpture and they talked about how the Delta for them is truly the heart of their culture. It really does form a heart in terms of having water come in, water leave. It really is sort of how many Native Americans see the area and see the Delta is the heart of their culture. Often you see maps like this that show the different tribal affiliations of people in California. You have the Nisenan, the Miwok, the Patwin, the Yokuts, all these different tribes, or what we think of as tribes. But really, they're not the sort of tribes that you think of when you think of tribes in other parts of the country. When the Native Americans, before European settlement and American settlement, really Native Americans lived in tribelets, villages. They were focused on a very small area. They had relationships with other villages, but really they sort of functioned on their own. There wasn't a large tribe as you think of in other parts of the country. There's not many situations that are like the Native Americans in California. And really, they were able to rely on the natural resources that are here to really live productively, live very well. In fact, western San Joaquin County at one point had the largest population density of any place outside of Mexico. That's something that I think a lot of people don't really think about is how thriving it was at one point. But then you have the Spanish come in. You had the Mexican, you had the Americans come in. Obviously, there was a lot of deaths that happened as a result of that. There was a lot of diminishment of their culture, at least temporarily. I wanted to have a map of the California missions and just show you something that I think a lot of people don't really think about. Notice that all the missions are located on the coast. The reason for that is that the Spanish tried to get into California, into inland California, and it was difficult. The marshland, they realized that was scary. They didn't really want to deal with all the marshes that were through here. Native Americans, it was a place of resistance. They could resist the Spanish very effectively. There's a reason why Mount Diablo is called Mount Diablo. It's the Devil's Mountain, because the Spanish saw the area as a very scary area. But native tribes are still around, they're thriving, and one of the things that state government has been a long time to figure this out is that they realize that they need to consult with Native Americans to really think about how they have, for millennia, treated the environment. This knowledge that Native Americans have had about the area for, like I said, millennia, can be a really important part of our environmental practices now. You see here a ceremonial burning. Unfortunately, this isn't in the Delta, but at least it gives you an example of things that are happening to sort of take advantage of that knowledge. The Delta also was an important area in terms of farming. One of the things that happened is that the gold miners, after they were done with the gold rush, realized there's some really good farmable land here. We should really take advantage of that. And so a lot of people that had come for the gold rush decided to stay and decided to farm. The Delta was really known for asparagus for decades. Unfortunately now, you don't really see it much anymore. There's a lot of crops that you don't really think about, asparagus, pears, that are really synonymous with the Delta. Several years ago, the San Francisco Estuary Institute did a Delta landscapes project where they looked at what the Delta used to look like and what it looks like now. If you notice the picture on the left, that was what the Delta looked like in the early 1800s. Notice all the small little river, waterways, sloughs. It was truly marshland. Water was everywhere. But when the Americans came, they looked at this and they thought, this is a breeding ground for mosquitoes. This is not an area that's farmable. We want to make it farmable. And so what happened over decades is you saw the Delta turn into something completely different. On the right, that's really a distinct environment. Now you have islands. You didn't have islands before. So how did this happen? You had levee building, which initially started with the Chinese. The Chinese were from the Pearl River Delta. They were very familiar with the kind of environments that the Delta is like. After the railroads was built, they were used to build levees. Unfortunately, one of the problems with the levees, that these initially were built, is that they're peat levees. And peat soil is very, very soft, and it's easy to kind of float away. So unfortunately, these levees were helpful, but not as helpful as they would like it to be. Eventually, what ended up happening is you had large dredges. This is a clamshell dredge. On the right, you see that little clamshell, which goes in, takes soil from underneath the water, and then puts it up onto the land. It was much more stable levees than before. This image comes from the Dutra Museum Foundation. The Dutra Museum in Rio Vista is a fantastic place to learn about this history. And so over time, you had There still is all of these things to kind of keep the delta dry. You see the Clarksburg pump house. The great story about this is that this was initially supposed to go to the Netherlands, but World War I happened. People in Clarksburg said, we'll take that. And so they took all this pump equipment and were able to kind of keep the area dry. Not a lot of people realize that Caterpillar got started in the delta. And the reason for that is that, as I mentioned, peat soil is very soft. And so what would end up happening is that you would have tractors that would just sink into the soil and they couldn't move them. So a very enterprising person named Benjamin Holt decided to put a track on these tractors. And that is how was invented the modern Caterpillar tractor. So Caterpillar got started in Stockton. It was kind of a Silicon Valley of ag equipment in the day. And Letourneau was somebody who kind of took a lot of Holt's inventions and modified them in a great way. And at one point, Letourneau's industry supplied 70% of the earth-moving equipment for the Allies during World War II. That started in Stockton. Also, you had fruit. Pears are a very common, you encourage you to pear fair every year in Cortland. There's a lot of different crops that came through the area that were able to really flourish. As I mentioned asparagus earlier, at one time you had potatoes, you had wheat. Obviously, over the years, those crops have changed. Now you see a lot of vineyards, although you see some of those vineyards coming out now, but there's a lot of vineyards in the area now. Speaking of which, the old sugar mill. So as time has gone on, now agritourism has become a much more important part of the Delta economy. So the old sugar mill in Clarksburg is a fantastic place to experience it, but there's lots of wineries throughout the region, including Bogle, which is one of the largest in the country. One of the things that I like to quote is Jack London. Jack London was a person who knew the Delta well, and in one of his books, he talks about going through the Delta and not hearing English all day. There's so many people from all parts of the world who came into the Delta. It was an amazing amount of diversity in the area. The groups that way I think we really think of now, the Chinese, Japanese, Filipino, Portuguese, Italian, Sikh, all these different groups have come through the area and really have made a real strong presence, their presence felt in the area. So there were examples of segregated schools in the Delta, don't get me wrong, but there were places where there was not segregation. This picture from 1921 in Clarksburg shows a very diverse group of people. There are so many people that I could mention, but I'm just going to mention a few about these pioneers, these people that have really made their presence known in the area. George Shima was called the Potato King. He came from Japan, was initially working for others, and then decided to start working on his own. And he produced an incredible empire. Unfortunately, that made him a target. He ended up losing a lot of his empire because of racism, but his influence is still being felt. Tilly Lewis, I love this picture of her. She was a showgirl from Brooklyn, born from Austrian Jewish immigrants. She went to Italy, met a man there who ended up becoming her husband, who knew something about Italian tomatoes. And so Tilly Lewis eventually came to Stockton and started Tilly Lewis Foods, started the first tomato cannery in the U.S. Tilly Lewis also was sort of a pioneer in diet, NutraSweet, those sort of supplements. And she really was a very critical person in the food industry. I also want to mention Dolores Huerta, also from Stockton. She was important in many ways, and she still is around. She's still a great resource. She, along with Cesar Chavez, was important in the United Farm Workers, really made an impact on how modern ag farm workers are able to live. So also I wanted to talk about some other things that were going on. The inland defense of the area. During World War II, San Francisco was considered not the safest place. There's a lot of concern about the Japanese bombing San Francisco. And so as a result, a lot of things moved inland. Pittsburgh, Camp Stoneman there really was the place you would go if you were going to the Pacific during World War II. There were POW camps throughout the area, through Sacramento, through Clarksburg, all through the area. But the story I wanted to tell was about Port Chicago. Port Chicago is just west of Pittsburgh. Port Chicago was a thriving area, had a lot of military activity. They were loading munitions on ships, and there were a lot of African American sailors that were doing this work. One day in July of 1944, like a little spark happened, and then a huge explosion happened. Over 300 people were killed. It was the largest loss of life stateside during World War II. Many of them were African American. And so after this explosion happened, African American sailors were asked to go back to work. And they said, when you do some safety measures, then sure, we'll go back to work. But they didn't agree with that. And so what ended up happening is that these sailors were court-martialed, and they became known as the Port Chicago 50. Thurgood Marshall, who argued Brown versus Board of Education, came out to represent these sailors. But unfortunately, they were court-martialed. But about last year, the last sailor was finally absolved of their crimes. I mentioned Jack London before. Jack London loved to come through the area. This is him on his boat. So Jack London wrote Tales of the Fish Patrol that was based on the Carquinez Strait. Joan Didion wrote her first book, Run River, about the Delta. There are many painters who have found a lot of inspiration in the area, including Gregory Condos and Wayne Thiebaud. There's a lot of amazing things about the area that people have really come to love. A lot of people know the Delta as a recreational retreat, whether it's non-motorized boating or motorized windsurfing. There's lots of options for people to enjoy the Delta. I mentioned before that the Delta Protection Commission is a state agency. Most of our commissioners are locals. Supervisors from the 5 Delta counties are represented. You have cities represented on the commission. And so it's sort of a unique entity to be able to run the National Heritage Area. We were created in 2019. And so our role is really to serve as the catalyst entity that's sort of managing things, but managing them with partners throughout the region. So National Heritage Areas, not a lot of people are probably familiar with them. They've been around since the mid-'80s. National Heritage Areas are different than national parks. They're not federally owned. They're not federally regulated. Instead, it's really an opportunity to celebrate the area and to have things run on the local level. And so that's the reason why we're the local coordinating entity. The work that National Heritage Areas do, historic preservation, natural conservation, recreation, there's lots of things that they do. There's 62 National Heritage Areas in 36 states and territories. Here's a picture of all those. You can go to the National Park Service website and see these in a little bit more detail. So they've been gradually moving westward. When we were created in 2019, there were 2 created in Washington and another created in Arizona. We're hoping that eventually there's more of these National Heritage Areas that people can celebrate in the West, including in California. There's lots of different things that National Heritage Areas do. We sort of have the same ingredients, but we use them in different ways. So some National Heritage Areas are focused on preservation, some are more focused on natural resources, some are focused on education. It's really dependent on what the area wants. National Heritage Areas are really successful and they're very popular. In fact, when the National Heritage Area Act was passed several years ago, there was an amazing amount of bipartisan support for it. It's a national story. People come from throughout the country to visit National Heritage Areas because they know that these are important places. These are significant landscapes. And so as a result, people in the Delta are able to know that they live in a nationally important area. It's also very collaborative. Lots of partnerships. We have a partnership program that we're growing right now, and also we have National Park Service involvement. So we have the expertise of the National Park Service, even though we're a local entity. What are potential partners? As you can see on this list, pretty much anybody. We want to work with lots of different groups, different people. If you're interested in the area, then we want to work with you. So what are we doing right now? We're growing the list of partners right now. We also have a passport program launching very soon. If you're familiar with the National Park Service Passport, it is a place where basically you can go to different National Park Service units throughout the country. You have a little book. You can get a stamp in there. You know that you visited this particular area. We're going to have passport sites throughout the National Heritage area. We're going to be launching this in the next few weeks. We'll have locations in West Sacramento, throughout the Delta. We started just a couple months ago on our tourism branding and marketing plan. The Delta is an area that really I think is very tourist friendly, and so we're trying to see what we can do to bring people into the area and really celebrate the area. The Delta Leadership Program, which brings people together from throughout the area to really develop their leadership skills, develop a knowledge of the area, and many of the people that are now working on our advisory committees are graduates of the Delta Leadership Program. So we're really growing the leadership throughout the area. Delta Heritage Forum, that's a conference that we do every year, and so if you want to sign up for our newsletter, you can find out a little bit more about that. Welcome signs, hopefully you've seen a few welcome signs into the area. America 250. Next year is the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. Just about a week ago, I guess a couple weeks ago, we had the 175th anniversary of California as a state. And then also next year is the 250th anniversary of the De Anza expedition. If you're not familiar with it, the Anza expedition really was the Spanish first expedition through California. And that happened in 1775 and 1776. We have a Delta Heritage Courier, our newsletter. It's really a great opportunity to kind of learn about things that are going on in the area and learn about different events going on. We're also looking to do a Junior Ranger, so we want to have kids come into the area. We want them to learn about the Delta. And hopefully soon we will also have a grant program as well. It is great to be here tonight. I just really want to thank you for coming out, learning a little bit something about the Delta. It's really gratifying to go out and talk about the National Heritage Area and talk about the Delta because, I mean, even in talking to Delta audiences, there's still a lot of things that they don't know. And on top of that, they don't really know necessarily about the National Heritage Area yet. So, this is, for me, I really enjoy getting out, talking about it. It gives me an opportunity to get feedback about what we're doing and really talk about the kind of work that we're doing.